Hello, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Marcus Sedberry. I'm so thankful for the transformational experience of the NCAA Dr. Charles Whitcomb Leadership Institute. The program was one of the most challenging and rewarding leadership experiences I've ever been a part of. It gave me hands-on strategic planning and career mapping experience. It challenged me to grow personally and equipped me with tangible skills for my professional career. But most of all, it gave me a family of industry experts with shared experiences that I can lean on at any time. Always remember, be loved and be you. Enjoy the episode.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at OneQ Leadership. Our guest today is Timothy Wise. Tim is the Senior Associate Athletics Director for Facilities, Events, and Revenue at Notre Dame. Greetings, Tim. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ty. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Yes, sir. Now, you spent time at Miami, Wisconsin, and I think your time also overlapped with me when I was a player at Michigan State back in the days, and of course, a couple other stops in there, but you have over 26 years of experience. So that's a wealth of kind of experience and knowledge and credibility in the industry.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for that. Yeah, as they say, I've been around the block a few times, and I'm proud of my career and really the diversity and the background of the places and the experiences that I've done over the course of my 25 plus years in the industry. So I'm just excited to share my knowledge and my expertise and the things that I do day in and day out.
Right, which is a lot, right? You also serve on the board of directors at MOA, the Minority Opportunities and Athletics Association. So we'll touch on that a little bit. What I want to start with is really your responsibilities there at Notre Dame and how they enhance the athletics department. Because you talk about facilities and events with looking at your background, they kind of overlap in terms of facilities, events, but then there's also this revenue aspect. So tell us a little bit about your role there at Notre Dame.
Sure. Thanks. A good question. As you can see, I have a long title. However, behind that title, there's lots of responsibilities. And really, facilities, that's the day-to-day maintenance and upkeep of all of our facility infrastructure, housekeeping, operations, things of that nature. And then also the big piece that keeps me very busy is capital projects and renewals. So anytime that we build a new building or we renovate a building, all of those things, I'm involved with that from that perspective. And then the event management and game management is really the sports operations and working with the conference offices, league offices, working with visiting teams, officials, a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that you don't really see, table crew, video scoreboard operators, trainers, all of those type people that help make our games function appropriately. So I manage and oversee all of that. And then the revenue piece comes into play, obviously, when you have a facility infrastructure, particularly as big as we do here at Notre Dame or at several of the other places that I've been. We can put on concerts, we can put on special events, we can put on shows from that perspective. But then also here at Notre Dame, we have 2 golf courses. So the 2 golf courses report up to me. And then also our Compton Family Ice Arena, which has a big youth hockey presence and a community presence. So that's where the revenue generation comes in from. How do we get additional resources from the use and the rental of our facilities, then the 2 golf courses, and then the Compton Family Ice Arena.
Oh, that's interesting. Are you the person trying to find other uses, or do they operate on their own and then they report to you to make sure everything is in line on how things should be?
Yeah, good question. So it really depends on the facility and what we're trying to do. For the most part, within our main athletics complex is usually either myself or someone making an outreach to one of the facility managers and saying, hey, is your facility available to use? If so, then we'll start going through the rental agreement process. But then also we have a division on campus called UEE, which is the University Enterprises and Events. So we would work with them if we're looking to bring any type of major concert or large scale function to either like Notre Dame Stadium or the Joyce Center from that perspective.
Oh, yeah.
So last year we hosted Garth Brooks in the football stadium. So my staff, we would work with UEE to manage those type events.
Man, that's huge. Is that seeing as that they have someone responsible for it, it's bigger than a blip on the revenue stream for the department. Is that a significant part of revenue? A, and then B, is that revenue like UEE, Garth Brooks, that's spread throughout the school. It's not just athletics revenue, right? Like, tell me about that type of breakdown.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, it's a joint effort. So there's a combination. So to your point, you have UEE, you have campus, you have athletics. So there's more of that shared responsibility from that perspective. So it doesn't just all go to the athletics department from that perspective because you have several other units that are managing it. So we just kind of work in concert, and then we work out a funding model from that perspective.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I do wonder along that line, I got a couple more questions on that line, on this line of your of your responsibility, which is interesting to me. How are you evaluated when you talk about facilities, events, and then you have this other revenue structure? Like, how do you, when you sit down, talk to the person you report to, or when the team that works with you is evaluated? Are we talking about how well an event went, how much revenue was brought in? I mean, like, what are the things that you're evaluated on, I guess?
Sure, no, good question. Really, I'm evaluated on how we operate and how we function day in and day out
Okay.
versus how much money we potentially could bring in from that perspective. So it's how well do we maintain our facilities? How well do we work with our sports teams and our sports programs? How well do we work with our internal partners within athletics? And then how well do we work with our external partners on campus in terms of being able to function and operate on any given day from that perspective. So it's kind of a joint effort. It's really about being in the leadership chair. And, I manage our master planning for athletics, our strategic planning for our facilities group here, oversee the policies, procedures, those type things, supervise 6 direct reports to me. And then there's about 60 other people underneath me. So when you look at managing and evaluating staff,
Hmm.
budgets, all of those things. So it's kind of a joint effort of how I get evaluated.
Yeah, that's interesting. Talking about leadership, and you probably can answer this relative to the entirety of you being in leadership positions. Is there someone, or do you hire someone, especially not being at Notre Dame really that long? Is there someone you lean on when thinking about making some decisions regarding strategy or strategic decisions? Obviously, you want to talk to athletic director and the people who make the final decisions. But are there people on your direct staff that you, I guess, are you the type that gets input from everybody, or is there like one main person, your number one, that you go to? Like, all right, look, here's what I'm thinking. Like, how have you structured that in your career?
Yeah, good question. It really depends on what the subject matter is.
Okay.
And so, I have several people on the staff that I rely on and count on. Sunita Gates, she's fairly new with me, but she's my right hand director of operations. She really works with me and kind of overseeing and managing the day to day and then some of our scheduling issues. So, certainly, if it's something related to that, I'll go to her. We have an associate AD for facilities that deals with the day to day work of our facility staff. So if there's a question related to facilities or with a project, then I'll go to that person. And then we have an associate AD for game management, event management. So if it's something that's dealing specifically with the sports operations or with the league office, then I'll go to that person. So it really varies on who I go to. But once we start to get talking about projects on the large scale,
Yeah.
obviously I've been around for a long time, so I have a lot of friends and colleagues in the architectural world and the construction world. So depending on the nature of the project, I usually reach out to one or two of those sources to kind of throw some ideals and throw some things out to them about what have they worked on in the past, what have they seen, do you think this will work, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned earlier renewal, and my assumption when you said it was that means we are upgrading a facility. No, is that what renewal is?
Correct. It is, in other words, deferred maintenance, but
Okay.
yes, it is updating our facilities. So, for example, if we need to replace the roof,
Uh-huh.
if we need to replace the HVAC system, we need to replace the piping system, those things are considered renewals for the
Oh,
university.
okay. Okay. So when you talk about adding a new locker room or something like that, that's probably a bigger scale. Like, I've always wondered how does a department decide when it's time to upgrade, when it's time to make something better. And it may have been something that was built in the last 10 to 15 years, but the arms race. So tell me about that
Yeah.
aspect in terms of conversation strategy.
Yeah, I was going to reference the arms race because in this day and age, if you don't keep up, you're
Yeah,
going to get left behind.
right.
But then also just from a recruiting perspective, it just makes sense to ensure that you have the latest and the greatest in the first class facilities. But also just from a safety and a health and wellness perspective, you just want to make sure that you're providing a safe and welcoming environment for not only the student athletes and the sports teams,
Mm-hmm.
but also our visiting teams and then those fans and guests that come into our facility on any given event from that perspective. But really what we look at is you usually start with an athletics master plan. So you create that plan and where you bring in an outside architect firm to really go through an assessment of all of your facilities and kind of
Okay.
where they are and what's the condition they're in from that perspective. And you can get a good handle on what things you need to do or work on for the future. But then also you meet with your internal stakeholders. Obviously you start with your building managers and they're there each day. So they see and know what's going on in the facility and probably what needs to be worked on. But then also you work with our coaches from that perspective because they all have needs, but they all have different needs.
Right.
They all want the latest glam and the shiny
Yeah, right,
things and the
exactly.
bells and
Barbershop and
whistles,
stuff like that. Yeah.
barbershops and everything like that. So we work with them to figure out to get their input, their thoughts, and then obviously we work with our athletic director and some of our key university leadership folks to really put a comprehensive plan together to lay out what things do we need to address, and then when do we need to address them, and then how much is it going to cost to address those issues as we move forward.
Yeah.
And then we would just work with our university development office in terms of a fundraising perspective to get those funded.
Yeah. The person that comes in and does the assessment, I imagine that person has to be in tune with the rest of the country, with how recruiting works. With you know what I mean, because they're going to
Yeah.
tell you like, hey, I mean, down the street, you know, is that how that person? Because this is a third party that comes in and is
Correct. And there's usually someone from a major architect firm in
yeah.
the country. So there's 3 or 4 major architecture firms in the country, and
Okay.
usually most universities will work with 1 or 2 of those groups, and then sometimes a local architect as well, because they gives that local flavor and perspective. And particularly when it comes to permitting, you can work much better with the local architect. But the national architect, to your point, they've got a lay of the land of what's happening across the country and what are some of the things that other universities are doing. But I think the big thing for us is we try not to mimic or be like someone else. We
Yeah.
try to figure out how can we continue to be uniquely Notre Dame.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is looking at your bio. You've done similar work, right? Obviously, picked up responsibilities, picked up leadership roles, but in terms of facilities like at Miami or Wisconsin, you bring in third parties to use the facilities. What I wonder about facilities and events across the country is there like a philosophy on facilities and events across the country or strategic planning for upgrading facilities, or is it like each campus does its own thing, or it's just everybody else is getting new so we got to get new, or is there in general philosophy that guides what you guys do?
Yeah, no, I don't know that there's a philosophy across the country. It's more so it's that uniqueness and specialty to that particular campus or university. So because everybody's so different and everybody has a different funding model,
Yeah.
and then everybody has a different infrastructure in terms of how old their facilities are or how big they are or where they're located. So all those unique characteristics they go into play when you're trying to determine really what facilities should you upgrade or what should you do next. So to answer the question, yeah, everybody's different. Everybody's unique. You take your own different perspective to what's going to work best for your particular campus situation.
Yeah. So when you came over from Miami, it's like, so yeah, I have the experience and know how to make decisions in general, but I need to learn what we're doing here, how we think about things, what is our philosophy, and how we want to present ourselves in terms of our spaces on campus, I guess. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. At Miami, we had 18 sports. Here at Notre Dame, we have 26 sports.
Right.
So that to itself lends itself that we have a different infrastructure that is a lot greater than what we had at Miami. So it takes a few more people, a few more relationships, a few more calls to kind of get things done versus when I was at the University of Miami.
Yeah, which is interesting. I'll ask this last question relative to your work in facilities and events, capital projects, and then we'll move on. What are some items that people they might not consider if they haven't had the experience you have, and they just have always had a person they lean on to advise them in the right direction and help them create a strategy? What are some things that they might may miss, or they haven't considered, or just think about in terms of maybe an AD or somebody who's a deputy who comes like from development or comes from a different background and has always had a person, but now they may have to tune into it. If that question makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely, it does. I think the biggest thing for me is staffing, meaning the people.
Mm-hmm.
People are the heart of any successful facility. If you don't have a great building manager, housekeeping staff, security staff, maintenance staff, you will not have a successful facility. So you got to have the right people that work with you, that get the vision, they understand what you're trying to accomplish. And then I think you'll be much better off. Another big thing that I think we sometimes miss is that the operating budget for when we either build buildings, renovate buildings, or take over buildings, sometimes we forget that we got to have an operating and a maintenance budget in order for these facilities to function.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes I think leadership, they don't have a great appreciation for what that means, but any true leader will obviously provide a thorough budget of what it would take to maintain the building, not only day to day, but then also from an event perspective, because you have your daily office workers and student athletes, but then you also have your sporting events that happen on any given night or weekend. So you've got to account for those type things. And then the other big piece is functionality versus the glam and the glitz.
Yeah.
Again, yeah, in this day and age with the arms races and everybody having the latest and the greatest renovations, and that's great. And coaches want the new shiny toys, bells and whistles, and that's great. But then they oftentimes forget about how does the facility function? How does it flow? Are the restrooms in the right location? Are the exit doors where they should be? Are meeting rooms, strategically placed around offices for people to get from point A to point B? I just think sometimes folks miss the functionality of a facility versus always looking at the glam and the glitz. So we just got to keep those things at the forefront of our mind. And then the last thing is really in any facility, you may have to value engineer some stuff out. They call it VE every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that always goes is storage, and then things like AV and technical stuff. And so if you don't have good storage, you're not going to have a good facility. So make sure you keep the storage and you keep the technical things that help you be successful.
Storage and value engineering must mean cut, right? That's got to go. That's got to
cut.
Go.
That's right. Cut.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Oh, one quick follow-up. If somebody's working at a place where the leadership may not understand about the maintenance budget and the operations budget, what do you suggest they do if that's a fight they have to fight, but you don't, it's hard to figure out how to do that, right? How do you handle something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, you try to sit down with leadership and you walk them through the overall budget. You don't necessarily need to go to in the weeds or into the details. But I think you give them a big picture of what it would cost to operate. You can Google, you can go online, or you can get other firms to help you figure this out. But every facility has a square footage, and then you have an applied maintenance cost that you apply to each one of those square footage, and that gives you a big picture number of what it costs to maintain and operate a facility. So you try to have those conversations on a large scale level with your athletic director or your CFO from that perspective, so they get an example, understanding of it. But also the biggest way that I try to help people learn and understand is that just walk through the facility with me. So you can see the infrastructure for yourself. You can see either that the carpet needs to be replaced, or that the light bulbs are gone bad, or that the HVAC system is not working.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing like being in Miami and the HVAC goes out in August.
Yeah, right.
You learn quickly that, I need to replace the AC unit. So you try to do those things on a first-hand basis so they can actually see it, breathe it, eat it, and know it with you, so they get a better appreciation for it.
Yeah, that's important. I want to ask you a little bit about your time with MOA. You're on the board, so my assumption is that means you've been involved with MOA for a long time. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, those things are important to us. And somebody like you and me, people of color, that has been important for a long time. I'm glad the world seems like they're trying to catch up to it. But I had a recent conversation with Stan Johnson, executive director of MOA, and we talked about the goal or the outcomes of getting people in a pipeline, but then also the outcomes of making sure people are getting jobs. So I wonder, being on the board, just given some of your insight, and then based on your experience in the industry, some of your insight on those two type of outcomes with MOA.
Yeah, no, those two outcomes are important on very high for us.
Mhm.
And Stan does a good job of leading us and helping us, work with our, partners across the country, whether it's the NCAA or Lead One or some of those other organizations, to ensure that we're doing right by us
Yeah.
from a minority perspective. And so MOA does a great job with making sure that we represent underrepresented groups and ensuring that minorities have a voice. And particularly when it comes to jobs and retention, what we try to do is work with, again, some of those other ancillary groups to ensure that we have programming and that we have training, and that also that we have a voice to be able to share with those hiring managers to say that, hey, we have these qualified folks over here that can do the job if you want these names from us to be able to support you and your initiatives and what you're doing. So we're just a great resource to athletic directors, to presidents, to chancellors, to any other organization that really wants to do the work of, supporting underrepresented groups and helping more of us get to the chair.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? And beneficial and needed in a whole lot of industries actually in this country. I wonder specifically about you. When we're young, we're trying to make happen what we can make happen for ourselves, gaining credibility, gaining influence, gaining responsibilities. And at some point in that journey, we get to a point where it's like, okay, it's not just about me out here. Let me figure out how I can help other people get to where they need to be. So I wonder when did that happen for you? When did you see that this was a thing that I actually can have some influence in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging?
Yeah, that happened for me probably about 20 years ago. I think 20 plus years ago, somewhere in there. I was at the University of Denver, and then the NCAA Leadership Institute. Well, back then it was called the NCAA Leadership Institute for Ethnic Minority Males. It was started just a year prior by the NCAA and the MOIC and that internal group there. But I applied to be a part of that program. I was a part of the second class. And during that time, I really started to develop the passion for DEI and really what does it mean to be an underrepresented person, particularly in the world of collegiate athletics. When you look around, and the majority of our student athletes are a minority, particularly when it comes to football and basketball, the major sports out there. So from during my time with the Leadership Institute, just developing a passion for helping others to get to where they want to get in their career, I really became about access and opportunity. How do we get access to programming, initiatives, training, funding, the things that others are getting that we were not able to get? And then how do we get the opportunity to be the chair, the AD, the deputy AD, or just have a seat at the table? So for me, again, I really look at it as access and opportunity, and how do we work together to create those things for us?
Is that something that you've been tactically doing, I guess, over the past 20 years, like hiring the interns, hiring the people who are in your number two positions and that type of thing?
Yes, absolutely. I can't say it was a running joke, but the thing at Miami was that I had the most diverse staff
Hey, look,
within
you got
athletics
to make it happen,
department.
right? That's hilarious.
I had the most diverse staff, and for me, it was just about making sure I had representation on my staff. I really wanted a uniquely different staff from that perspective. I had a female, white female, black female. I had a Hispanic, had a Latino, had a black male, had a gay male. For me, none of that mattered in terms of their race and ethnicity
Yeah,
because they really did a great job.
right.
So that worked out well. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that I had a well represented group of folks that worked for us and that our student athletes saw on any given day.
Yeah, which is excellent. This has been a good conversation. I'll tell you one thing. When I was deciding on reaching out to you, I asked a couple people, do they know you, and what they thought, and they were like, yeah, he's my go-to guy when you talk about facilities and capital projects and that kind of thing. And then another person was, yeah, and he's really involved in MOA, so you might want to ask those types of questions too. So I really appreciate you joining me on the One Question Leadership podcast. I appreciate your career, and I appreciate the things that you keep at the forefront and the information that you shared so far on this podcast.
Thanks, Todd. No, I appreciate you having me here and me sharing my expertise and my wisdom with you. And so I just look forward to pushing the rock and helping us get better.
Keeping it going. Yes, sir. That was Timothy Wise. He is the Senior Associate Athletics Director for Facilities, Events, and Revenue at Notre Dame. And of course, I am Ty Brown with one question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.